Although there have been many emperors, kings, and various princes who have striven, aspired, and desired to contract perpetual relationships with this same Grand Duke of Lithuania, Almighty God has preserved any such deed until the present day for thine own very royal majesty. Therefore, may thy majesty, most serene princess, for this most salvific plan, acknowledge that same Lord and Grand Duke as your son, and consent that he be joined into lawful matrimony with thine own most beloved daughter, the most illustrious Princess Jadwiga, Queen of Poland. For we do believe that divine glory, the salvation of souls, honor for the people, and growth of the kingdom shall ensue from this. However, before the matter mentioned here comes to fruition, Jogaila, Grand Duke, shall first, together with all his brethren who have not yet been baptized, and likewise with his relatives, the nobles and landowners, great and small, who reside in his lands, earnestly seek and desire to accept the Catholic faith of the Holy Roman Church. And although many an emperor and sundry princes labored toward this end, they attained very little, notwithstanding their strenuous endeavors. Nevertheless, God Almighty has reserved this honor for thine own royal majesty. Done in Creva, Monday, on the eve of the Assumption of the glorious Blessed Virgin Mary, in the year of our Lord, 1385.
In this green northern land, history and legend have met and fused. With the martyrdom of Saints Antanas, Eustachius, and Jonas in 1347, the Baltic Sun Cross, once carried by pagans, became the Cross of Jesus Christ.
Lithuania was once the largest country in Europe. Its earliest Christian contacts were with the Orthodox Church, and the first church built in Lithuania was an Orthodox church.
Through centuries of history, from its first and only king, Mindaugas, to the time of the Grand Dukes, to the union with Poland in the Commonwealth of Two Nations, to the partitioning between the empires of Eastern Europe, to early independence in the 20th century, to invasions and occupations of both Nazis and Soviets, to becoming the first nation to break away from the Soviet Union, this proud people has kept their faith in Christ, among them centuries of Orthodox Christians and dozens of saints.
But there is still much work to be done in this little land where Orthodox Christians are a minority.
Welcome to the Wolf and the Cross, an Orthodox Christian pilgrimage in Lithuania, a documentary from Ancient Faith Radio, created and written by Father Andrew Stephen Damick and Richard Rohlin.
Nearly 700 years ago, the Holy Brothers Anthony and John, with their cousin Eustathius, were martyred by pagan priests at the behest of the Grand Duke Algirdas. Their bodies hung on a sacred oak. In time, that same oak would be felled to build a church and an altar to the Most Holy Trinity. Six and a half centuries later, no true pagan temples remain in this land of ancient forests, little hills, and green valleys, while churches dedicated to the worship of the Holy Trinity can be found in every city, town, and village. Even in the wake of the crippling secularism and religious persecution of 20th century Europe, the vast majority of Lithuanian people identify as Christian, specifically Roman Catholic. In some respects, this should not be surprising. After all, every nation in Europe has a conversion story. But Lithuania was the last to convert. and the story of how the Baltic Sun Cross came to bear the image of the crucified Christ is not a simple one. It is the story of civil wars, quarreling brothers, marriage alliances, crusaders, and a land ruled by pagans caught between Rome and Constantinople. One of the things that makes this story difficult to tell is the fact that modern national borders and nation-states map somewhat poorly to their medieval equivalents. For instance, the modern nation-state of Lithuania covers a territory of 25,200 square miles. By contrast, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania in the time of Algirdas was several times larger, stretching from the Baltic Sea in the north and west to the city of Poltava near the Black Sea in the south, in modern-day Ukraine, and within 50 miles of Moscow in the east. Famously, in an exchange with the Teutonic Order, Algirdas boasted that the entire Rus should belong to the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. In this episode, when we speak of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and later the Polish-Lithuanian state, we're talking about a territory which included much of the present-day Baltic states, as well as Belarus, Ukraine, parts of modern Russia, and Poland. In the course of this documentary, we've been referring to the people who inhabited some of these lands as Ruthenians. This name is an exonym, that is, a name from outside the region, derived from the Latin Ruteni, applied to Eastern Slavs starting in the 11th century, and probably ultimately deriving from the Slavic Rus. Incorrect or not, the name stuck, especially in historical sources, and we find it used consistently throughout the Middle Ages to refer to some of the people of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, which itself comprised two groups, Lithuanians and Ruthenians. Ruthenians formed the majority of the population, but Lithuanians were the greater part of the nobility. Today, the modern nation-state of Lithuania comprises what may be thought of as the heartland of the medieval Grand Duchy of Lithuania, sometimes called Lithuania proper, where the Lithuanian language has always been spoken. It is divided into 5 historical ethnographic regions. Some of these regions will be quite important to the story we are telling in this episode and throughout the rest of this documentary. And so I have asked our friend, Father Gintaras, to come back and tell us a little about these regions and what makes them distinct.
There are 5 ethnographical regions of Lithuania. They are called Aukštaitija, Žemaitija, Dzūkija, Suvalkija, and Lithuania Minor, or Little Lithuania. In Lithuanian it's Mažoji Lietuva. So first two I mentioned, Aukštaitija and Žemaitija, literally the names mean highlands and lowlands. Lithuania actually doesn't have mountains. What we call mountains would be hills at best for foreigners. Our land is pretty even, with only some higher places. So those names, when we call it highlands, lowlands, and what we call mountains here, usually for foreigners imagine that it should be very different places, but that's not so different. There is no such stark contrast as, for example, we have in America very different nature, very different regions. Here it is much more similar across the country. So the first two regions, Aukštaitija and Žemaitija, the first means highlands, the second one lowlands. Aukštaitija is the place where the Grand Duchy of Lithuania started. Sometimes people say that capital of Aukštaitija is a city called Panevėžys. Of course, that's debatable, but The region is one of the largest out of those five, and it's central, northern, and eastern Lithuania, more eastern part of Lithuania. So, because Grand Duchy of Lithuania comes from this region, a lot of Lithuanian history is connected to this region, and stereotypically, people from this region, they had clothes with the brightest colors. They wore most beautiful garments, etc. So stereotypically, the people who want to look good, look beautiful, they use bright colors, and and that's one of the stereotypes about Aukštaitija. Žemaitija is a second region I've mentioned. Žemaitija or Samogitija in English, I think. As I said, it means lowlands, and they have a very distinctive way of speaking. And Žemaitija was baptized late in Lithuanian history in 1413 after the Battle of Žalgiris or Grunwald, because for some time it was occupied by the Teutonic Order. So they have a very distinct way of speaking. They have all the ethnographical groups have their own version of Lithuanian language, but Žemaitija has a more distinct dialect if we compare it to standard Lithuanian. And stereotypically, people say that Žemaičiai, people of Žemaitija, they are very stubborn, they are very impulsive, emotional, and they are people. If you have a conflict with Žemaitis, it's better not to argue with him, because he is much less calm than people from other places of Lithuania. Also, like it's not official, but people would say that the capital of Žemaitija is a city named Telšiai. And if you ever visit Telšiai, you will see that they have a lot of signs written in Samogitian dialect of Lithuanian language. So they are very proud of their local heritage. Another region is called Dzūkija. People from Dzūkija, Dzūkai, they also call their region Dainava. And Dzūkija historically was one of the poorest regions of Lithuania. So their garments, their ethnic clothing is one of the humblest. And Dzūkija is famous for its forests. They have a lot of mushrooms, a lot of berries. They hunt. Traditionally, many men would work as woodcutters. And there is a saying that if there would be no mushrooms and no berries in Dzūkija, Dzūkija's girls would be naked. Meaning that they wouldn't have money for the clothing, because they were famous in Lithuania for their forest culture, for the culture connected to the forest. And if you visit Dzūkija, you will see that their national ethnic dishes are distinct in this way from other regions, that they have a lot of hunted animals. They have a lot of mushrooms. In this way, it is different from what you eat in other regions. And today, the unofficial capital of Dzūkija is Alytus. Also, one of the major cities is Varėna. But if you ever visit Dzūkija, you should definitely visit Merkinė, because Merkinė is a very ancient city with a rich culture. In the 20th century, it became one of the smaller towns in this region, but in the ancient times it was a very important city. So it has a very rich culture although during the urbanization it didn't grow as large as the neighboring cities. Another region of Lithuania is Suvalkia. People of Suvalkia are called Suvalkai, and if you know something about Poland, you probably know that in the northern part of Poland there is a city called Suwałki, and that's because a lot of Lithuanians live in that part of Poland too. There is a large Lithuanian community, and people who are called Suwałki live both in Lithuania and Suvalkia and across the border in Suwałki, in Seini, and other cities of Poland. And because this region was not always under the Russian Empire when other ethnographical regions were under the Russian Empire, because it was connected to Poland in the 19th century during the Napoleonic Wars. For that reason, this region had a more developed city culture, and people from that region were historically richer than in other regions I've mentioned. And the dialect of Suwałki was actually a basis for the standard Lithuanian language, which we use today in our communication, on TV, in our documents, etc. And because of the city culture, and because Suwałki, people of Suwalkia, they were richer, maybe that's why a stereotype developed. And stereotypically, Suwałki are considered to be the cheapest people, those who count every penny and try to save money on everything. And the fifth region of Lithuania is Lithuania Minor, or Little Lithuania. Little Lithuania was never under the Russian Empire, so they have also very distinctive culture. They, after the partition of the Commonwealth, they were part of a Prussian state, so they were influenced by the Germans, and most Lithuanians in the Little Lithuania were not Roman Catholic, but they were Protestant Christians, especially Lutherans. A lot of famous people from this region, like Martynas Mažvydas, author of the first book in Lithuanian, Simonas Daukantas, etc., they were Lutherans. So that's one of the difference, because most of the Lithuanians are Roman Catholic, but people who come from Little Lithuania, they are mostly Lutherans. And two major cities of Little Lithuania were, of course, Klaipėda, or in German Memel, and Königsberg, or in Lithuanian Karaliaučius, which is today Kaliningrad. And in Kaliningrad Oblast, there are a lot of towns which were prominent in Lithuanian culture, but today, for historical reasons, they are mostly abandoned by the Lithuanians. Like, for example, a town called Tilžė, or Tilsit in German. Now it's called Sovietsk in Russian. And there are more towns like this, which were important historically, but today they have almost no Lithuanian presence. So these are 5 regions, and I also told you about some stereotypes connected to those regions, and there is a joke which connects all of these stereotypes. One time, devil kidnapped a Žemaitis, an Aukštaitis, a Dzūkas, and a Suvalkas, and put them in a bag. And the devil wanted to bring them down to hell. But while the devil was walking with a bag, a morning rooster cried, and the devil threw the bag away and ran to hell by himself. And four of the people I've mentioned, they were left sitting in the back. So they're sitting together, and Žemaitis doesn't want to go out. He says, whoever put me in this bag, he should bring me out of it. I won't go anywhere. He was stubborn, and he just remained in his place, and he refused to go out. Another person, Aukštaitis, also didn't want to go out. He started brushing his hair, and he said, I don't want to go out because I don't have a good look. How will I look if I go out like this, out of a bag? What would people think about me? So he also stayed in the back. And Dzūkas also stayed in the back. He said that he's scared, and he said, I want my friends to leave first, and after them I will go together with them. And Suvalkas stood up, and he went out of the bag. He took the bag away from everyone. He folded it, he put it in his pocket, and he went home. Lithuania Minor was part of Russia after the partition of the Commonwealth. It wasn't part of the Russian Empire. So when the Lithuanian books were forbidden in the Russian Empire, Lithuania Minor became the cradle of the Lithuanian publishing and literature. And that was the region where at that time, in the second part of the 19th century, all the newspapers, all the books in Lithuanian language were published. And actually people from Lithuania Minor would breach the law and try to illegally bring books to the larger Lithuania, to other four regions of Lithuania. So Lithuania Minor had, for this reason, a very important role for the preservation of the Lithuanian culture.
Both Orthodox Christians and Roman Catholics made missionary efforts in Ruthenian lands throughout the early Middle Ages. It should especially not be forgotten that Ruthenian lands included the Kievan Rus, themselves only baptized as late as the year 988. Most Orthodox Christians are probably familiar with this story, but it is so important to the history of the Christianization of the Ruthenian lands within the Grand Duchy that it bears repeating.
Some 200 years before the time of Gediminas, the great Prince Vladimir of Kiev rose. The grandson of the famous and powerful Princess St. Olga, Vladimir had a pagan father and a Christian mother. While still a teenager, he was forced by his fratricidal brother, Prince Jarapolk, to flee to Norway, where his kinsman, Håkon Sigurdsson, gave him an army of Norse warriors. At the age of 19, Vladimir returned home for vengeance. After a brief war, he defeated his brother Jarapolk, took the cities of Kiev and Novgorod the Great, and was proclaimed sole ruler of the Rus. But Vladimir's new kingdom was troubled by religious strife. The small Orthodox Christian communities in Kiev, the fruit of the labors of St. Olga, were persecuted, and even the pagans under Vladimir's rule revolted against his attempts to alter and reform their religion. Vladimir needed to unite his people under a single faith. What happens next is recounted in a work of medieval history known variously as The Tale of Bygone Years, the Rus Primary Chronicle, Nestor's Chronicle, after the monk who wrote it, or simply the Primary Chronicle. It was first compiled in Kiev in the year 1113, and is an important record of how the East Slavs, the people of the Ruthenian lands, understood their own story in the context of the wider Greek, Roman, and Christian world. The entry for 987 tells how the great Prince Vladimir set out to choose a religion for his people.
Vladimir summoned together his vassals and the city elders and said to them, "Behold, the Bulgars came before me, urging me to accept their religion. Then came the Germans and praised their own faith, and after them came the Jews. Finally, the Greeks appeared, criticizing all other faiths but commending their own. And they spoke at length, telling the history of the whole world from its beginning. Their words were artful, and it was wondrous to listen and pleasant to hear them. They preached the existence of another world. Whoever adopts our religion and then dies shall rise and live forever, but whoever embraces another faith shall be consumed with fire in the next world. What is your opinion on this subject, and what do you answer?" The vassals and the elders replied, "You know, O prince, that no man condemns his own possessions, but praises them instead. If you desire to make certain, you have servants at your disposal. Send them to inquire about the ritual of each and how he worships God." Their counsel pleased the prince and all the people. So they chose good and wise men to the number of 10 and directed them to go first among the Bulgars and inspect their faith. The emissaries went their way, and when they arrived at their destination, they beheld the disgraceful actions of the Bulgars and their worship in the mosque. Then they returned to their own country. Vladimir then instructed them to go likewise among the Germans and examine their faith, and finally to visit the Greeks. They thus went into Germany, and after viewing the German ceremonial, they proceeded to Constantinople, where they appeared before the emperor. He inquired on what mission they had come, and they reported to him all that had occurred. When the emperor heard their words, he rejoiced, and did them great honor on that very day. On the morrow, the emperor sent a message to the patriarch to inform him that a delegation had arrived from the Rus to examine the Greek faith, and directed him to prepare the church of Hagia Sophia and the clergy, and to array himself in his sacerdotal robes, so that the Rus might behold the glory of the God of the Greeks. When the patriarch received these commands, he bade the clergy assemble, and they performed the customary rites. They burned incense, and the choir sang hymns. The emperor accompanied the Rus to the church and placed them in a wide space, calling their attention to the beauty of the edifice, the chanting, and the office of the archpriest and the ministry of the deacons, while he explained to them the worship of his God. The Rus were astonished, and in their wonder praised the Greek ceremonial. Then the emperors, Basil and Constantine, invited the envoys to their presence and said, "Go hence to your native country," and thus dismissed them with valuable presents and great honor. Thus they returned to their own country, and the prince called together his vassals and the elders. Vladimir then announced the return of the envoys, who he had sent out, and suggested that their report be heard. He thus commanded them to speak out before his vassals. The envoys reported, "When we journeyed among the Bulgars, we beheld how they worship in their temple, called a mosque, while they stand ungirt. The Bulgarian bows, sits down, looks hither and thither like one possessed, and there is no happiness among them, but instead only sorrow and a dreadful stench. Their religion is not good." Then we went among the Germans, and saw them performing many ceremonies in their temples, but we beheld no glory there. Then we went on to Greece, and the Greeks led us to the edifices where they worshiped their God, and we knew not whether we were in heaven or on earth. For on earth there is no such splendor or such beauty, and we are at a loss how to describe it. We know only that God dwells there among men, and their service is fairer than the ceremonies of other nations, for we cannot forget that beauty. Every man, after tasting something sweet, is afterward unwilling to accept that which is bitter, and therefore we cannot dwell longer here. Then the vassal spoke and said, If the Greek faith were evil, it would not have been adopted by your grandmother Oya, who was wiser than all other men.
As the primary chronicle records, Vladimir's path to the baptismal font was by no means straightforward. He went to war with the Eastern Roman Empire, experienced miraculous healing, married a Byzantine princess, and finally received baptism at the Church of St. Basil in Kherson, the site of an ancient Greek colony in Crimea by the shores of the Black Sea. Once baptized, he returned to his people, and the great baptism of the Rus began, accompanied by an exorcism of the land itself.
When the prince arrived at his capital of Kiev, he directed that the idols should be overthrown and that some should be cut to pieces and others burned with fire. He thus ordered that Perun should be bound to a horse's tail and dragged along Borichev to the river. He appointed 12 men to beat the idol with sticks, not because he thought the wood was sensitive, but to affront the demon who had deceived man in this guise, that he might receive chastisement at the hands of men. Great art thou, O Lord, and marvelous are thy works. Yesterday he was honored of men, but today held in derision. While the idol was being dragged along the stream to the Dnipro, the unbelievers wept over it, for they had not yet received holy baptism. After they had thus dragged the idol along, they cast it into the Dnipro, but Vladimir had given this injunction: If it halts anywhere, then push it out from the bank until it goes over the falls. Then let it loose. His command was duly obeyed. When the men let the idol go and it passed through the falls, the wind cast it out on the bank, which since that time has been called Perun Shore, a name that it bears to this very day. Thereafter, Vladimir sent heralds throughout the whole city to proclaim that if any inhabitant, rich or poor, did not betake himself to the river, he would risk the prince's displeasure. When the people heard these words, they wept for joy and exclaimed in their enthusiasm, If this were not good, the prince and his boyars would not have accepted it. On the morrow, the prince went forth to the Dnipro with the priests and the princess and those from Kherson, and a countless multitude assembled. They all went into the water. Some stood up to their necks, others to their breasts, the younger near the bank, and some of them holding their children in their arms, while the adults waited farther out. The priest stood by and offered prayers. There was joy in heaven and upon earth to behold so many souls saved. But the devil groaned, lamenting, Woe is me! How am I driven out hence? For I thought to have my dwelling place here, since the apostolic teachings do not abide in this land. Nor did this people know God, but I rejoiced in the service they rendered unto me. But now I am vanquished by the ignorant, not by apostles and martyrs, and my reign in these regions is at an end. When the people were baptized, they returned each to his own abode. Vladimir, rejoicing that he and his subjects now knew God himself, looked up to heaven and said, O God, who has created heaven and earth, look down, I beseech thee, on this thy new people, and grant them, O Lord, to know thee as the true God, even as the other Christian nations have known thee. Confirm in them the true and unalterable faith, and aid me, O Lord, against the hostile adversary, so that, hoping in thee and in thy might, I may overcome his malice. Having thus spoken, he ordained that churches should be built and established where pagan idols had previously stood. He thus founded the church of St. Basil on the hill where the idol of Perun and other images had been set, and where the prince and the people had offered their sacrifices. He began to found churches and to assign priests throughout the cities and to invite the people to accept baptism in all the cities and towns. He took the children of their best families and sent them to schools for instruction in book learning. The mothers of these children wept bitterly over them, for they were not yet strong in faith, but mourned as for the dead. When these children were assigned for study, there was thus fulfilled in the lands of the Rus the prophecy which says, "In that day the deaf shall hear the words of a book, and out of their gloom and darkness the eyes of the blind shall see." For these persons had not ere this heard words of Scripture, and now heard them only by the act of God. For in his mercy the Lord took pity upon them, even as the prophet said, "I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious."
Although in modern times we may hear of the baptism of the Kievan Rus as the birth of the Russian Orthodox Church, it is important for the story of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania to remember that it took place in Ruthenian lands centered around Kiev, the capital of modern Ukraine. This story did not happen in modern-day Russia. And in the late medieval period, the story of the Orthodox Rus was happening in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Thus, by the time of Algirdas in the 14th century, the pagan Grand Dukes of Lithuania ruled over a vast kingdom composed mostly of Orthodox Christians, some 4 centuries after the death of the great Prince Vladimir. These pagan Grand Dukes often took Orthodox wives, a useful alliance with the Orthodox princes of Kiev and elsewhere, and those wives brought Orthodox priests with them. In Western Europe, the 10th century Holy Roman Emperor Otto I, called the Great, had warred with the Slavic tribes on the border of his empire, a conflict his son Otto II, called the Red, inherited. Otto II ascended the throne just a few years before Prince Vladimir entered the baptismal font, and he found an ally in Bolesław the Brave of Poland, the second Roman Catholic Polish monarch and the first to be crowned king. To cement his friendship, Otto sent Bolesław a replica of the spear of Saint Maurice. Saint Maurice, the African commander of the famous Theban Legion, was martyred in AD 287 in what is now modern-day Switzerland. Starting at least with Otto I, Saint Maurice was considered the patron saint of the Holy Roman Emperors, and he had come to be closely associated with a relic known as the Holy Lance of Vienna. The Holy Lance of Vienna was a spear believed to have belonged to Saint Maurice or Saint Constantine the Great, in which was embedded, so the legends say, one of the nails used at the crucifixion of our Lord Jesus Christ. Many legends surround this object, but by the time of Otto II, it had become one of the official insignia of the Holy Roman Emperors, a symbol of their authority and divine right. By giving a replica of this weapon to Bolesław, Otto was sending a clear message to the Polish king about his status as a Christian monarch and the role he was expected to play in converting the pagan Slavs. As we will see, this lance eventually plays a small but crucial role in how the story of the Lithuanian conversion was told, although perhaps not in a way that Otto would have expected. In the early days of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, a significant number, at times a majority, of its citizens were Orthodox Christians. This was thanks to early contacts with the Kievan Rus, as well as the eastern and southern expansion of the Grand Duchy, eventually encompassing most of what today is the modern state of Ukraine. In these early years, Orthodox Christians outnumbered both pagans and Roman Catholics, but they were, with a few notable exceptions, common folk, ruled over by pagan Grand Dukes and their aristocracy. Eventually, this would all change with the baptism of Algirdas's son Jogaila into the Roman Catholic Church. This event marks two important moments in the life of the Grand Duchy. First, Jogaila makes Roman Catholicism the official religion of the Lithuanian state. Second, he effects a dynastic union with the Kingdom of Poland and takes the name Władysław II, King of Poland. This turns out to have been one of the most important events in the history of the two states, and in the history of Europe. But it was not the first time Lithuania had had a king holding the scepter of the Grand Duke. In our last episode, we heard the story of the first and only king of Lithuania, Mindaugas. In 1253, nearly 100 years before the rise to power of the Grand Duke Gediminas, who had the dream of the Iron Wolf, Mindaugas united the warring Lithuanian tribes and presented a unified front against their external enemies. He opposed the Tatars, a fierce nomadic people of Muslim Turkic origin, and their incursions from the Crimea, while also making a brief peace with the Livonian Order. The Livonian Order was the first of two Roman Catholic crusading orders, which would have a major impact on Lithuanian history, functioning as the pressure which forged the warring Lithuanian tribes into a nation. The history of the Livonian Order begins with the first decade of the 13th century, when Pope Innocent III sanctioned a crusade against the tribes of Baltic pagans and Orthodox Christians living in what we now know as the Baltic states. This crusade was ostensibly called to protect clergy and missionaries along the important Baltic trade routes, in particular the bishopric of Riga. These efforts at forceful conversion were fiercely resisted by the Semigalians and Samogitians. One bishop of Riga, a German named Berthold of Hanover, was even killed in battle with the Livonians, as the Sword Brothers themselves recounted.
Bishop Berthold began to build Riga like a man who wanted very much to stay there. The Lets and Livs agreed about taxes, and that helped the Christians. The entire people was proud of the good Bishop Berthold because he was a virtuous man who led the Christians faithfully. In quest of glory, the Estonians came against them. Bishop Berthold and the Crusaders were at Riga with an army. He comforted his followers, saying, "Good heroes, remember that Jesus Christ spilled his holy blood for us on the cross. The heathens' power is never so great that we may not attack them before they descend upon us. We are here for the sake of God in heaven, who never abandoned his friends in the heat of battle. Those Christians who die will shortly receive eternal life. Let my soul be your guarantee of this exchange. I will stay by you, both in life and death." All rejoiced at his comforting words. The people armed themselves then and went forth against them on the beach, boldly charging the Estonians as soon as they caught sight of their army. Men were better then than they are now, as we have all had occasion to learn. Whenever we need help nowadays, scarcely anyone will press to the fore of a group. The bishop, however, rode at the head of his followers in a knightly fashion, like a true lord. Both sides sought a fight to the death. The Christians suffered greatly. Oh, the pain of it! 1,100 lay dead, the rest were routed, and Bishop Berthold was lost in battle.
In his speech to his troops, Bishop Berthold repeats a common promise made to Crusaders, that anyone who dies on the field of battle against the infidel would receive the forgiveness of their sins and eternal life. Bishop Berthold was succeeded by a man named Albert. With the blessing of the Pope, Albert, as the new Bishop of Riga, also called the Prince Bishop of Livonia, since Livonia was ruled as an ecclesiastical state, established the Livonian Brotherhood of the Sword as his own personal standing army. The Sword Brothers kept a chronicle of their deeds, known as the Livonian Rhyming Chronicle. Here is the story that they tell of their origins, as spoken by the Pope.
Because of the nature of the region, we shall also have authority to found a crusading order on the model of the Templars, who are known as the Knights of God, overseas and elsewhere. Give them 1/3 of the people and land to rule as their own. They shall stand under my protection, and that of all future popes.
The crusade was ultimately successful, and the new lands, modern-day Estonia and Latvia, were declared a new province of the Holy Roman Empire known as Terra Mariana, Mary's land. According to the sponsors of the crusade, the Virgin Mary had chosen the Baltic lands to be her own kingdom, conquered by the swords of Crusaders. The Livonian Brotherhood of the Sword was made up of warrior monks on the model, as the Rhyming Chronicle suggests, of the Knights Templar. It is odd, as an Orthodox Christian, to imagine monks carrying weapons of war, but it had proven to be a popular and effective model for the Latin Crusades in the Middle East. There, what had started as essentially small security forces offering protection and hospitality to Christian pilgrims became powerful standing armies with their own governments, territories, and even banks. As subsequent history would show, this particular mixture of religious zealotry, wealth, and military power was often unleashed as a destructive force on the very people these warrior monks had sworn to convert and protect. One such military order, the Order of the Brothers of the German House of St. Mary in Jerusalem, also known as the Teutonic Knights, would prove to be even more important to the history of Lithuania than the Livonian Brotherhood. As the full name of their order implies, the Teutonic Order had its origins in Jerusalem and in the Crusader city of Acre during the early 13th century. However, thanks to Hermann von Salza, the well-connected Grand Master of the order, they were soon charged with guarding the border of the Kingdom of Hungary against the Turkic Cumans in what is now central Romania. Here, the Teutonic Order perfected what was to be their favorite military tactic, constructing a line of impregnable fortresses from which they would conduct lightning raids, always retreating back to their castles before their enemy could mount serious resistance. This proved to be extremely effective against the Cumans. In just a few years, the Teutonic Order would repeat these same tactics on the shores of the Baltic, for by 1225, the order had overstayed its welcome in Hungary. At the behest of Polish dukes, they relocated to Pomerania, near the border of the modern city of Gdansk. Grand Master Hermann von Salza absorbed a small, pre-existing military order known as the Order of Dobrzyn, the Prussian Cavaliers of Christ, and began the project of subduing the pagan Baltic tribes of Old Prussia. These Baltic wars became the training grounds for new initiates into the Teutonic Order, preparing them for battle in the Crusader states, where the order still had strongholds. The so-called conversion of Prussia played out over 50 very bloody years. The Teutonic Order inched slowly forward, forcing the Prussians, Lithuanians, and Samogitians to be baptized at the point of the sword. Those who did not were deported or executed. For their own part, the pagan Prussians showed no mercy to those members of the order they managed to capture, offering them as sacrifices to their gods. Perhaps the most memorable of these deaths is that of Brother Gerhard von Rud. In 1320, Marshal of the Order Heinrich von Plotzkau led 40 Teutonic Knights on a raid from Klaipėda Castle, Klaipėda being part of the Teutonic territory of Prussia at this point. The raid was successful, but as they were returning home laden with the spoils of their pillaging, they were ambushed by a force of Samogitians. 29 of the knights were slain, and Heinrich was taken captive. The Chronicle of the Land of Prussia, the Teutonic Order's primary set of records, tells the story of what happened next.
When the heathens had killed everyone, they captured Brother Gerhard von Rude, put him in chains, and cruelly put him to death in this way. They dressed him in the armor of 3 men and set him on a horse which was tied to 4 stakes, according to their custom. And they put so much wood around it that they could barely see horse or man, and then they set fire to the wood and burned God's elect knight to death in the resulting furnace. This was done as an offering to the heathen gods for their victory.
After their devastating defeat at the hands of the Samogitians and Semigalians at the Battle of Saul in 1236, the Livonian Brotherhood of the Sword was subsumed by the Teutonic Order, thereafter operating as a semi-autonomous branch known as the Livonian Order. The Crusader states of the Baltic were now united. After their northern march was checked by St. Alexander Nevsky at the Battle on the Ice in 1242, they turned their attention to the southeast and set their sights on the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. However noble their initial aims of protecting pilgrims and comforting the sick, by the 14th century, the Teutonic Order had grown into a distorted parody of itself. Its Grand Masters made war on Christians and pagans indiscriminately, acting to further the territory and privileges of the order, rather than to further the gospel. The order's own chroniclers followed Bernard of Clairvaux in justifying the brothers' bloodshed in the name of spiritual warfare, and in the end their efforts to convert the Prussians, Samogitians, and Lithuanians were never really successful, at least not in the ways that they intended. All of these people would eventually convert to Christianity, more in spite of the Teutonic Order than because of it. Even after their forced conversion, the Prussians would spend centuries revolting against the order until the time of the Protestant Reformation, when they were finally ousted. The pressure exerted on the Grand Duchy of Lithuania by the Teutonic and Livonian orders is a key piece of context for understanding the Lithuanian conversion in 1387. Algirdas, whose pagan priests had executed the 3 holy martyrs of Vilnius, had married 2 different Orthodox wives, both of whom had borne him offspring. In 1377, Algirdas' son Jogaila succeeded him as Grand Duke. The kingdom he inherited looked very different than it had in his grandfather's time. It was a vast, sprawling territory, almost 2 different countries. The power of the Gediminid dynasty was centered in Lithuania proper in the northwest, with the vast Ruthenian territories of the former Kievan Rus in the south and east. It was a land of Orthodox Christians in the east and Roman Catholics in the west, ruled over mostly by pagans. But what would Jogaila, the son of an Orthodox mother and a pagan father, become? Jogaila was an ambitious man, of naturally abstemious tendencies. Historian Daniel Stone tells us that he drank no alcohol and ate lightly except at occasional banquets. Hunting was his favorite activity, and he also liked music, especially Ruthenian fiddlers. And the kingdom he inherited seemed doomed to be torn apart by civil war. His uncle and junior co-ruler Duke Kęstutis, based out of the city of Trakai, was responsible during the time of Algirdas for defending the realm against the Teutonic and Livonian orders. Under increasing pressure from the Crusader kingdoms, he began opening negotiations with the Pope to convert to Christianity. Thus, he thought, giving the Crusader orders no further quarrel with him, in exchange for a crown. But the intermediary for these negotiations, the Polish king Casimir II, took advantage of the opportunity in 1349 to unexpectedly attack the Grand Duchy in its Ruthenian lands, ruining Kęstutis' plans. In 1361, Kęstutis was captured in a skirmish after defeating 2 Teutonic knights in battle at the age of 60. Later, with the help of his brother Algirdas and a servant, he escaped imprisonment in one of the order's castles by boring a hole through the 3-meter-thick walls of Marienburg Castle, which at the time was the largest castle in the world. Kęstutis was no one to trifle with. After the death of Algirdas in 1377, Jogaila decided to buy himself some time by signing a secret treaty with the Teutonic and Livonian orders, in which he agreed not to interfere while they waged war on his uncle Kęstutis and cousins. This is one of the most controversial moments of Jogaila's life. Historians have pointed out that there was a 50-year gap between uncle and nephew, and that Jogaila was open to Christianity, unlike Kęstutis, a dedicated pagan, and needed his western front secure so that he could focus on his war with the Grand Duchy of Moscow. Kęstutis found out about the secret agreement. While Jogaila was away, he marched on Vilnius and took it, and then had Jogaila captured as he returned to the city. The octogenarian Kęstutis then resumed his war on his old enemies, the Teutonic Order. While he was away fighting, the citizens of Vilnius freed Jogaila, and uncle and nephew marched to face each other in battle. But the battle never happened. The kinsmen agreed to negotiate the night before the battle, and Kęstutis and his son Vytautas rode to Jogaila's castle at Kreva in modern Belarus under a flag of truce. But it was a trap. They were taken prisoner, and 5 days later, Kęstutis was found dead, strangled in his cell. But his son Vytautas, truly the image of his father, escaped to fight another day, making his way under cover of night dressed as a woman. Kęstutis would prove to be the last of Lithuania's great pagan dukes, and he's something of a folk hero to this day. His deeds have been the subject of symphonic overtures and short stories, and there are monuments to him even as far away as Russia. Vytautas fought on, escaping from the clutches of his cousin into the waiting arms of the Teutonic Order. Over the next 2 years, Vytautas led a perilous existence, mired in constant treaty negotiations between Jogaila and the Order. During this time, Vytautas, the son of Lithuania's last pagan duke and a famously beautiful pagan priestess, received Roman Catholic baptism and the name Wigand. But upon reconciling with Jogaila, Vytautas abandoned the order and returned to Lithuania. It seems that during this time, Vytautas, who seems to have had sympathy and admiration for Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and would later marry his only daughter off to the Grand Prince of Moscow, converted, at least for a time, to the Orthodox Church. It's difficult to speculate what the young duke's motivations might have been for converting. Cynically, we might say he was hedging his bets. There was a large Orthodox majority in Lithuanian lands at this time, and as an Orthodox ruler, Vytautas would be able to build alliances with the powerful Grand Princes of Moscow, who had just broken the power of the Mongol Golden Horde in the region and were now on the rise. A more charitable reading, borne out somewhat by Vytautas's later efforts to bring East and West together as Grand Duke, is that he really found something beautiful and compelling in the Orthodox faith. But the very idea that medieval people compartmentalize their choices between politics and religion in this manner is probably anachronistic. After all, people are complicated and usually have more than one reason for doing things, reasons not always known even to themselves at the time. In any case, Vytautas did not remain Orthodox for long. His cousin, Jogaila, was about to make a decision that would forever change the course of Lithuanian history. He was about to get married. In 1387, Jogaila faced a difficult choice. The Teutonic Order were offering him a treaty which would, among other things, mean his conversion to Roman Catholicism. Converting to Roman Catholicism at the hands of the most hated enemies of Lithuania might get the order off his back, but it would likely mean a revolt among his own people. His mother, the Orthodox Christian princess Juliana of Tver, encouraged him to marry Sophia, the daughter of Saint Dimitri of the Dawn. This would have required Jogaila to convert to Orthodox Christianity, but the crusading order saw orthodoxy as being little better than paganism, and this move would have meant a protracted conflict with the Teutonic order. But Jogaila found a third way. The Polish crown was currently undergoing its own dynastic crisis, and he saw a way out of both of their difficulties. The Polish king, Louis I of Hungary, had died without sons, and his elder daughter, Mary, was rejected by the Polish nobility because they did not wish to continue union with Hungary, leading to a civil war. The younger daughter, Jadwiga, was eventually crowned with the title King of Poland, not Queen, in Krakow in 1384, at just 7 years old. The title emphasizing her right to rule. She was briefly betrothed to the Habsburg Duke of Austria, but he was intercepted by Polish nobles who rejected him. So, she still needed a husband, and Poland was not yet at peace. And some of the Polish nobles looked to Lithuania. Thus, on August the 14th, 1387, at the Lithuanian Grand Duke's residence in Kreva, in modern-day Belarus, Jogaila signed the Union of Kreva, what was essentially an elaborate prenuptial agreement by which he agreed to settle some of Poland's diplomatic difficulties, convert to Roman Catholicism, make Roman Catholicism the official religion for the Lithuanian nobility, and attach the Grand Duchy to the Polish state, in exchange for marrying the young monarch Jadwiga of Poland and taking the Polish crown. Jadwiga was just 12 years old. The two married the following February 18th, 1388, and Jogaila held the scepters of both King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania. The Union of Kreva is a watershed moment in Lithuanian history, although Jogaila, now Władysław II Jagiello, King of Poland, was baptized Roman Catholic, as were his brothers and his cousin. They did not attempt to convert their people by the sword, as the Teutonic Order had done. Jogaila personally translated the Lord's Prayer and the Apostles' Creed into Lithuanian, and a number of enthusiastic, some said, overly hasty baptisms were held. What was more, the Polish and Lithuanian nations were now joined in a personal union, which would eventually become known as the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, a powerful state that endured into the twilight years of the 18th century. But Jogaila's problems were far from over. Vytautas, never one to sit on his hands, almost immediately initiated a civil war with his cousin, one which ultimately saw him installed in Vilnius as Grand Duke of Lithuania, known to Lithuanian history as Vytautas the Great, under Jogaila's overlordship, of course. And if Jogaila thought that his quarrels with the Teutonic Order would end with his conversion to Roman Catholicism, he couldn't have been more wrong. I'll share more about that later. For now, it's time for us to visit a castle. Remember Kęstutis, Jogaila's swashbuckling uncle who unhorsed Teutonic knights and escaped from Europe's most secure castle at the ripe old age of 60? He was the Duke of Trakai, and Trakai would continue to have a special importance for his son Vytautas after his death. It was here that his project of trying to reunite East and West would come the closest to being accomplished, resulting in one of the most multicultural cities of medieval Europe. As Father Andrew and I made our way to Trakai, our friend Father Ginteres gave us an overview of what we could expect.
So we're going to the ancient city of Trakai. Like Šiauliai, we have first mention of the city in the early history of Lithuania in the 13th century, but the city already existed when it was mentioned. So it goes even further down in history. And contemporary Trakai have two parts. It's the Old Trakai and the New Trakai. New Trakai were built in the 14th century. And the New Trakai were built by Grand Duke Gediminas, who also built Vilnius. And Trakai, for some very short, very brief period of time, was a capital of Lithuania. Later, it was just one of the main political centers, but it wasn't a capital. Trakai gained its prominence during the reign of Grand Duke Vytautas, and maybe it's a good time to explain what the title Grand Duke means.
Yeah.
Because it means different in Lithuania and Lithuanian history than in the Western Europe. Because Lithuania had only one Christian king, Rex. It was King Mindaugas, who was crowned with the blessing of the Roman Pope, and other rulers of Lithuania, they didn't have this title. Before the end of the 14th century, they were pagans, and they called themselves kings. For example, Gediminas calls himself Rex Litvinorum et Multum Rutenorum, which means king of Lithuanians and of many Russians. Russians in this context of the 14th century means all the Eastern Slavs. So they called themselves kings, but they didn't have a blessing from the Pope. That's why they were not considered kings by Western Europe. And the official title in Western Europe was Grand Duke. And in the end of the 14th century, there was a union between two states, Poland and Lithuania. And after this union, for a brief period of time, Grand Duke and of Lithuania and King of Poland were separate titles, and later it was connected to in one title. The same person would be King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania. And even later in the 16th century, the state became Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So Trakai is connected to this history of the union of Poland and Lithuania, because Gediminas, who started the ruling dynasty of Lithuanian state, which ruled for many centuries, he had, among other sons, two sons, Algirdas and Kęstutis. Algirdas became a Grand Duke in Vilnius, and he was the main monarch of pagan Lithuania at that time. And Kęstutis became a sub-monarch who resided in Trakai, where we are going. And this system was called diarchy, the rule of two, and Kęstutis ruled Semigotia, and Algirdas ruled eastern parts of Lithuania, which included the Russian lands. After the death of Algirdas, his son Jogaila became the Grand Duke in Vilnius, but he didn't want to continue the system of diarchy, so he killed his uncle Kęstutis, and a battle began between Jogaila and Vytautas, who was son of Kęstutis. Vytautas resided in Trakai, and during this battle, they, especially Vytautas, switched confessions a lot. He switched from Orthodoxy to Roman Catholicism, and this battle was resolved when Jogaila got a proposition from the Polish nobility. Polish nobility proposed to him to Christianize Lithuania, make it Roman Catholic because it was still pagan, to marry Polish Princess Jadwiga, and to become the King of Poland. And that's what he did. He became the King of Poland, he Christianized Lithuania, Lithuania became Roman Catholic, and as a resolution, he proposed to his cousin Vytautas that he would become Grand Duke of Lithuania. And they signed a union which stated that after death of Grand Duke Vytautas, this title will be connected to the crown of Poland. And the Grand Duke of Vytautas ruled Lithuania from Trakai, and the castle we see is the castle of Vytautas, and the Roman Catholic Church, which contains wonder-working icon of a Mother of God, was also brought into this church by Vytautas. The church itself was built by Vytautas. And this icon is venerated both by Roman Catholics and Orthodox Christians. It might be that Vytautas got it as a gift from Byzantium, and Vytautas himself was a figure who wanted to unite Western and Eastern Christianity. So, for example, he ordered frescoes in his palace to be painted by an Orthodox iconographer. They don't survive, but in memory of his vision of uniting East and West in the 18th century, when the Roman Catholic Church of Trakai was reconstructed, people made frescoes in the church in the Orthodox style. So you can see the remains of these 18th century frescoes, and this choice was made because of the person of Vytautas. And Vytautas is on one hand a symbol of this vision of Lithuania as a bridge between East and West, and on the other hand he is a symbol of the might and grandeur of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, because during his reign Grand Duchy of Lithuania became the largest state in Europe and reached its maximum size. Lithuanians would say that it stretched from Baltic to the Black Sea. And Vytautas was the person who reached Crimea during his military conquests, and he invited Crimean Tatars and Crimean Karaites to live in Trakai and in cities around Vilnius. One of the reasons was that, as you heard, it was not that uncommon that relatives would kill Grand Duke or Duke, and he wanted his personal guard not to be connected with anything in Lithuania. So Karaites and Muslim Sunni Tatars were perfect candidates for this because they had no relatives in Lithuania, they had different religion, and they didn't have any interest in killing the Grand Duke, so they became his personal guard.
Trakai itself was first established by the Grand Duke Gediminas before he founded Vilnius. A place of deep natural beauty, Trakai is almost hidden, a peninsula of land surrounded by 3 deep glacial lakes. Gediminas and his son Kęstutis built a series of castles in the area, the most famous of which is the Trakai Island Castle. During our pilgrimage to Lithuania, Father Andrew, his daughter Evangelia, and I visited Trakai and its island castle, one of the most popular tourist destinations in the country. And although it is restored and beautiful today, it was only a few decades ago that it was in ruins.
We are standing in front of the Trakai castle, and you can see that part of the castle is red and part of the castle is grey. That's because in the 17th century, during wars with the Russians, the castle was destroyed, and it was in ruins up until the 20th century. The grey part you can see is part of the original ruins. And in the 19th century, a famous Lithuanian poet, Maironis, who was a romantic like Lord Byron, who he took inspiration from, he wrote a famous poem about Trakai Castle, which is a poem by the same name. And it goes that this great castle is covered with mold. Oh, you have it. So you can read it in English.
Read it real quick. With lichen and mold overgrown all around, a time-honored castle there looms. Its true high-born ruler now sleeps below ground, yet Trakai outlasted his tomb. While centuries run, its grim ruins grow older. Deserted and lonely, they gradually molder. When over the castle the wind bursts to moan, the lake lying round climbs its walls. A wave rides a wave, and a moldering stone works loose and submissively falls. The towers keep crumbling, and day after day, so many a heart filled with gloom and dismay.
Thank you. So, this poem was written when Maironis looked at the ruins of the castle, and he romanticized this glorious past of the castle. And in the 20th century, decision was made to restore this castle. And lucky enough, because Vytautas was one of the leaders during the war with Crusaders, he was one of the leaders in the Battle of Žalgiris or Grunwald, and this was a battle with Germans. So Soviet government looked positively to the idea of rebuilding the castle because it symbolized a struggle against Germans. So they rebuilt the castle in the middle of the 20th century, and it became a museum.
So you're in a medieval castle right now, Richard. Are you living your best medieval life?
Pretty much. This is pretty amazing.
They don't have anything like this in Texas, do they?
No, unfortunately, we have to wait for our own Dark Ages to begin so we can start building castles again.
It seems reasonable.
I know it's
Dark, quote-unquote, ages.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
No, this is very, I mean, it's beautiful. The inside of the museum, which is what most of the castle is, has a lot of, well, like set pieces like this one. So basically it's just a room set up of one of the nearby, I think this is actually supposed to be a nearby Tatar community.
No, these
right?
Karaites over here?
Karaites over here and
Tartars over here.
Yeah. So showing what their living places would have been like and their traditional clothing around the 16th and 17th centuries. Yeah, it's all very well put together. Everything is in both Lithuanian and English, so very easy to find your way around.
Right.
I feel the need to Errol Flynn that drawbridge.
That's a verb now, Errol Flynn?
Yes. When applied to drawbridges, it's definitely a verb.
So we're back outside now, and we're moving to another part of the castle complex. There's actually a stage set up here, so they do concerts here.
Construction began on the island castle in the 14th century as part of Kęstutis' overall plan to harden Trakai's fortifications against attacks from the Teutonic Order. After his assassination, his son Vytautas continued the project even during his brief truce with the order, enlisting the Teutonic Order's stonemasons and engineers to help him finish the fortifications. It continued to serve as an important military outpost right up until the Battle of Grunwald. You'll hear more about that battle later, but for now, we'd like to invite you to come with us on a tour of the castle.
So we're walking around inside Trakai Castle right now, which is a museum. It's on an island about 30 minutes away from Vilnius, and there are numerous exhibits. Walk in a room now, they've got some medieval sounding music playing in the background here. Lots of images of the castle before it was restored, which wasn't that long ago. Looking through a window of the castle now, out at the lake. Birds flying by, some lovely trees. Boats. Boats. So, Evangelia, what's it like to be visiting a real medieval castle?
It's like I'm living out my medieval fantasies.
You getting ideas for stories?
Yes.
It took Vytautas a while after his civil war with his cousin before he was able to get Trakai back. When he did, it became his favorite residence. After the Battle of Grunwald, when the waning power of the Teutonic Order meant that Trakai was no longer needed as a center of military power, the castle was remade into a residence for the Grand Duke. King Jogaila frequently visited his cousin there, and it was adorned with art and rich furnishings.
So we're standing now in a hall here at the Trakai Island Castle, and there are thrones set up on one side, which are incredible carved wood, which with a sort of a Gothic style on top. And you see the Vitus, the knight on the horse, wearing the coat of arms, the Lithuanian cross on his shield. You can hear how it's kind of resonant in here. Yeah, so this is the hall. This would be where all the big events would be held. Once again, Richard is living his best medieval life.
I don't have a lot of articulate things to say right now because I'm just very happy.
So originally this Gothic hall was painted with Byzantine frescoes.
And this is part of Vytautas' program of uniting East and West, right?
Yes. Very cool.
There's a really amazing big tapestry on the wall here, which it's called Return from the Battle of Žalgiris, made in 1977. It does indeed look like soldiers returning from battle. You think those chairs look uncomfortable?
Yes.
Yes, but they're very impressive. You look like a Grand Duke or Grand Duchess if you sat in them.
One of interesting things for me personally is that if you look around here in the Trakai castle and pay attention to the Gothic elements of the castle, it's quite similar to the Gothic architectural elements we have back in Vilnius.
Speaking of art, you might remember how, in the last episode, Father Andrew said that there was only ever one Orthodox Grand Duke, whose name was Vytautas. Well, as it happens, that's only mostly true. As we mentioned earlier, Vytautas converted, at least very briefly, to Orthodox Christianity. Underlying this fact is the complicated question of the schism between Roman Catholicism and the Orthodox Church in this land on the borders of East and West. Vytautas' parents were pagans, famously so, but Jogaila's mother and even his last wife were Orthodox Christians. At various times they had close relationships with the Orthodox Christian metropolitans of Kiev and Olrus, and even corresponded with the Eastern Roman emperors. With the Mongols and Tatars on their door, and the power of the Grand Princes of Moscow on the rise, Jogaila and Vytautas were better positioned than most of the princes of Latin Europe to appreciate the advantages of reuniting the two churches. This openness extended not only to their political and religious policies, but also to their projects of culture building and beautification. For his part, Jogaila introduced the beauty of Eastern iconography and architecture to Poland, lending Polish Christianity a unique blend of Eastern and Western aesthetics which endures to this day. Vytautas included Byzantine-style frescoes and icons, both in his personal residence at the Trakai Lake Castle, as well as in the historic Trakai Cathedral. Before I tell you more about that, I want you to try to imagine for a moment the beauty of the castle. It sits on an island, a Gothic castle of orange and red bricks nestled among evergreens. The island is in the middle of a lake, deep blue and still and smooth as glass. Sailboats and bevies of swans glide across the deep azure waters, the silence and tranquility of the moment broken only by the chatter of tourists and an old man playing a concertina for tips on the bridge outside of the castle.
So we're walking along now the path away from Trakai Castle, and we're just reflecting on the incredible beauty of this lake that it's in the middle of, and so forth. And there's a man selling some trinkets here and playing his accordion. He's playing Old Lang Syne right now. Amazing.
In 1409, Vytautas the Great built a new cathedral church in Trakai. This church, the Cathedral of the Visitation of the Blessed Virgin Mary, currently holds the status of a basilica in the Roman Catholic Church. The feast to which it is dedicated, the Visitation of Mary, is itself a unique confluence of East and West. The feast was first brought to the West in the 13th or 14th century by Franciscan monks who had been present at the feast of the placing of the honorable robe of the Most Holy Mother of God at Blachernae. This Byzantine feast, which has for its gospel reading the passage in which Mary visits Elizabeth, the occasion of the Magnificat, found in Luke 1, verses 39 through 56, was the inspiration for the Latin feast, which was originally held on the same date, July the 2nd.
If you look around this Roman Catholic Church, you might see the remaining parts of the Orthodox iconography on the walls, because when the church was reconstructed in the 18th century, this style was chosen to commemorate the ideas of Vytautas the Great, Grand Duke, who wanted to unite Western and Eastern Christianity, who would order such frescoes in his own castle. Those frescoes in the castle are not anymore, but here in the church you can see the remaining parts of the old frescoes, which were done in memory of his ideas. Above the altar you can see Trakai Mother of God icon, miraculous icon venerated by both Roman Catholics and Orthodox Christians. And here on the left part of the church, near the door, you can see how it would look without coatings and
without the riza.
Mm-hmm. And you can see that this version of icon also has handles, because there is a traditional pilgrimage, Roman Catholic pilgrimage, from Gates of the Dawn in Vilnius to here in Trakai. They walk by foot, carrying the icon of the Trakai Mother of God, and we sing different hymns. This tradition spans many hundred years. It started during the plague and became a constant tradition. Orthodox Christians here have another tradition. They walk from Trakai to Vievis. It's about, in miles, I think it's about 5 miles, something like that.
The Visitation of the Blessed Virgin Mary was added to the Roman calendar by Pope Urban VI in 1389, in hopes that the Mother of God would by her intercessions bring an end to what is sometimes called the Great Western Schism, a time when there were 2 and even 3 rival papacies in Western Europe. That schism was brought to an official end at the Council of Constance in the years 1414 to 1418, a council at which Vytautas and Jogaila attended. In this light, the dedication of Vytautas' church to the Visitation may be seen as a deliberate statement about his hopes of restoring church unity, not just within the Roman Catholic Church, but between East and West. These hopes were nowhere better represented than in an icon housed in that church, a wonder-working icon of the Theotokos known as Our Lady of Trakai.
When Vytautas built the Church of the Visitation of the Blessed Virgin Mary in Trakai, he himself donated a splendid icon of the Theotokos to serve as the altarpiece, Trakai Maria, Our Lady of Trakai. This icon had been a gift to Vytautas from the Eastern Roman Emperor Manuel Paleologos II on the occasion of his baptism. It is not told which baptism it was, for Vytautas was baptized on 3 separate occasions. It may be that it was a gift to commemorate his what would turn out to be his brief reception into the Orthodox faith. The back of the icon bears an inscription commemorating the gift, but also bears the original name of the icon, Theotokos Nicopeia, the Victorious. Some say it was this very icon which was carried into battle by Emperor John II Comnenus against the Persians in the 12th century. Soon after its installation in the church in Trakai, the Mother of God began to work many miracles through her holy icon, and it became the first and oldest of the several wonder-working images of the Theotokos that grace the land of Lithuania. In 1603, a plague swept through Lithuania. In hopes of ending the plague, the people of Trakai carried the holy icon on foot from Trakai to Vilnius, singing and asking for the Virgin's intercessions as they went. To mark the miraculous end of the plague, through her prayers, this pilgrimage is still held annually to this day. In 1629, Bishop Eustachios Vlavichis wrote that God has favored us with many miraculous portraits in Lithuania of Our Lady, but the many miracles at the shrine of Our Lady of Trakai brought many people closer to each other and to their God. In 1643, a small boy drowned in Lake Gava, and the parents brought the child's body to the altar of the church and set him before the icon of the Theotokos. Through her prayers, the boy returned to life. Over the centuries, many collections of the miracles attributed to the Theotokos through this holy icon have been written and published. Each year on September 8th, the Nativity of the Theotokos, pilgrims gather to make the 18-mile journey on foot from the Church of the Visitation in Trakai to the Gate of the Dawn in Vilnius. Roman Catholics, Orthodox Christians, and even some Muslims venerate Our Lady of Trakai, Lithuania's first and oldest wonder-working icon. As Bishop Eustachios observed, she continues to bring many people closer to each other and to their God.
So far, most of this episode has dealt with the intersection and sometimes clash of pagan, Lithuanian, Roman Catholic, and Orthodox Christian cultures. But these weren't the only cultures in Lithuania. Trakai specifically was known even in the Middle Ages as a truly multicultural city, one in which pagans, Roman Catholics, and Orthodox Christians might find themselves alongside 2 other important ethnic groups, Karaite Jews and Crimean Tatars. Before we can tell you who these people are and how they came to be living in Trakai, we need to understand a little about how medieval cities worked. And for that, we need to talk about Magdeburg. The Magdeburger Recht, or Magdeburg Rights, or Magdeburg Laws, were a set of what are sometimes called town privileges, first instituted in the Holy Roman Empire by the Emperor Otto I. These laws were important for a few reasons. First of all, they created a system, including courts of appeal, by which cities could function as self-governing entities. They protected the trade rights of local trade guilds, as well as the rights to trade, property ownership, and something like due process for ethnic minorities, such as the Jews. Under the Magdeburg laws, for instance, Jews could not be compelled to inform on themselves or others if accused of a crime. These laws were responsible for the development of the great medieval cities of northwestern Europe during this period. Trakai, which was Grand Duke Vytautas' de facto capital, was the first Lithuanian city to be granted a charter under the Magdeburg laws. Under that charter, two very important ethnic groups were given their own quarters in the city and protection under the law: the Karaite Jews and the Crimean Tatars. As we walked the streets of Trakai, we entered its historic Karaite quarter, the place of those who read. Our guide, Father Ginteras, explained to us who the Karaites were and why they're so important to the history of Trakai.
So, if you look at the signs on the homes which surround us, we will see that this street is called Karaimu Gatve, or Karaim Street. Karaim, you might recognize that it's a plural of Hebrew, and literally, at least Karaites say that it means those who read. And Karaites, or Karaim, are a religious movement. They considered themselves to be Jewish in the sense that they adhere to Judaic religion, and this movement is connected to the ideas of the Sadducean movement of the Second Temple.
Sadducees,
yes. Yeah. The main idea in Karaite theology is that you have to follow only scripture. So they are sola scriptura before the Protestants. And that's what actually 19th century German historians of religion said about them, that they are proto-Protestants. This movement, although it had its precedents in the Sadducean movement, but it formed in the 8th century contemporary Iraq, in Baghdad. One of the founders of this movement was Anan ben David, Anan, son of David, who formed the main doctrines. So, two main foundations of Karaite faith are the 10 Commandments and the 10 principles of Karaite Judaism. And if we would summarize those 10 principles, it's the principle of monotheism, strict monotheism, and also the principle of written scripture alone. They did not recognize Talmud and oral Torah. They would say that Jewish rabbinic traditions were a distortion. And another principle is that every Jew should read the scriptures and understand them. That's why they call themselves Karaim, which means those who read the scriptures. And this movement went and became larger and larger in Palestine, then in Egypt. And when Khazars, yes, in English Khazars converted to Karaite faith. And this was the point in history when most of the believers became of Turkic origin. And today, Lithuanian Karaites who come from Crimean Karaites, they are ethnically Turkic, and usually they identify Karaites as Turkic people, and it's also a religious community. And because it was very important to understand the scripture, Karaites were one of the first, if we look at the Jewish tradition, we were one of the first who introduced parts of service in vernacular. And today, almost all of the service is in vernacular, in Turkic Karaite language. And also we translated the Tanakh, Old Testament, to Karaite language. We are in front of Kenesa. Kenesa is their equivalent of a synagogue. There are only 3 Kenesas remaining in Europe. One is in Trakai, another is in Vilnius, and the third one is in Crimea. And during the Soviet time, only Trakai Kenesa was opened. Other ones were closed.
As you just heard Father Gintras explain, the Karaite Jews are a sect of Judaism defined by a rigorous adherence to the Hebrew Scriptures as the supreme and final authority for Jewish law and theology. This is in contrast to most forms of rabbinical Judaism, which recognize some form of oral tradition or oral Torah, codified in the Talmud and subsequent works, as binding. In fact, the Karaite approach to the Hebrew Scriptures bears a striking similarity to the much later Protestant doctrine of sola scriptura, a fact which did not go unnoticed by German reformers nearly some 700 years after the Karaite movement was founded. Although officially originating in the early 9th century in Baghdad, under the Abbasid Caliphate, there are those who trace the roots of the movement all the way back to the Sadducees of the Second Temple period. By the 15th century, there were Karaites in the Crimea, that northern peninsula jutting out into the Black Sea. The Crimean Karaites were Turkic-speaking converts to Karaite Judaism, and according to their own legends, they were relocated to Lithuania as a reward for helping Vytautas the Great in a successful campaign against the Mongol Golden Horde. In fact, there is ample evidence to suggest that they were already in Lithuania, and particularly in Trakai and Vilnius before the time of Vytautas, but that certainly doesn't rule out the possibility that they helped Vytautas in his campaign. What is known is that Vytautas valued both the Karaites and the related Crimean ethnic and religious group, the Tatars. He valued them so much, in fact, that he guaranteed their protection under the law and exempted them from taxes which even the Christian nobility had to pay. The Tatars of Crimea were a Turkic-speaking ethnic group originating in the northeastern Gobi Desert in the 5th century. But by the 15th century, they were an amalgam of almost every single one of the various tribes and people groups which had inhabited the Crimea during the previous centuries. The Tauri, Scythians, Sarmatians, Alans, Greeks, Goths, Bulgars, Khazars, Cumans, Italians, and Circassians. They were part of both the Mongol Empire and its successor state, the Golden Horde, the latter of which struggled with both the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the princes of Muscovy and Novgorod over the lands which are today Belarus and Ukraine. This region, sometimes referred to as the Wild East of Europe during the 15th and 16th centuries, would see various waves of Tatar settlement. First, pagan Tatars, seeking refuge from Muslim persecution, and then later Sunni Muslim Tatars who settled in the region. The Tatars were a fierce, pusillanimous people, according to medieval historians such as Mykalo Lituanus, Michael the Lithuanian envoy to the Khanate of Crimea from 1537 to 1539, who wrote about them in a book called De Moribus Tatarorum Lituanorum et Muscororum, on the customs of the Tatars, Lithuanians, and Muscovites. After his campaigns against the Golden Horde, Vytautas the Great relocated a group of Tatar prisoners of war, along with their wives and children and herds, to the area around Trakai. Some of these were given to his cousin Jogaila, who had them christened as Roman Catholics, but others were allowed to keep their Sunni Muslim faith and gladly settled around Trakai and other Lithuanian cities, more than happy to avoid the wars of the steppes and the European Wild East. Along with Karaite Jews, they became Vytautas' personal bodyguard. The practice of hiring a foreign bodyguard is an ancient one. Notable historical examples include the Varangian Guard of the Eastern Roman emperors, Germanic warriors guarding the Byzantine monarchs. The basic idea is simple. Since these are foreigners, they don't owe anything to anyone except the ruler who brought them there, and have nothing to gain by turning on him and betraying him. The Tatars and Karaites were famed for their loyalty to Vytautas. In Trakai to this day, the houses on Karaite Street have 3 windows facing the street. According to Karaite tradition, the windows stand for God, country, and the Grand Duke Vytautas. Today, the Karaite quarter of Trakai boasts one of the few remaining Karaite kinessa, or synagogues, in the world. But military prowess wasn't the Karaite and Tatars' only contribution to Lithuanian culture. They also gave it some of its most distinctive foods. But before I tell you about that, let's hear what an expert has to say on the subject. Here's Motinele Justina back with another language lesson, this time on traditional Lithuanian foods.
Hello everyone! Today I would like to invite you to a short Lithuanian language lesson about Lithuanian food, and at the same time to give you a short overview of our national and traditional dishes. Nowadays, restaurants and supermarkets are full of different dishes and foods from all over the world. Nevertheless, traditional Lithuanian cuisine is very popular in our country. If you want to get to know Lithuanian food, the first place to go is to the Lithuanian countryside, which has preserved the traditions of our agriculture. It is no secret that Lithuanians are a meat-eating nation. According to recent data, we are one of the top meat-consuming nations in Europe. So let us take this opportunity to learn about the types of meat that are popular in Lithuania. Pork, kiauliena. Repeat after me. Kiauliena. Beef, jautiena. Jautiena. Poultry, vištiena. Vištiena. These types of meat can be found in many Lithuanian dishes. The Lithuanian summer is short. There is a period of just 4 months when we have fresh, naturally grown vegetables and fruits. Traditionally, when the season ended, Lithuanians would rush to preserve vegetables and fruits by canning and drying them, and also by making jams. To prevent vegetarians from getting too upset about this, let's go over Lithuanian vegetables too. Cucumber, agurkas. Repeat after me. Agurkas. Tomato, pomidoras. Pomidoras. Potato, bulve. Bulve. Onion, svogūnas. Svogūnas. Cabbage, kopūstas. Kopūstas. Beetroot, burokas. Burokas. Carrot, morka. Morka. radish, ridikas, bean, pupa, pea, žirnės. Some South Europeans joke that Lithuanians know only 3 vegetables: potatoes, tomatoes, and cucumbers. And although supermarkets are now full of all kinds of vegetables, potatoes, tomatoes, and cucumbers are still highly popular. I have even heard a joke. If you want to make a salad, you can cut up cucumbers and tomatoes. But if you want to make it more interesting, add onions. But this is not completely true. There are more kinds of Lithuanian salads. Most popular traditional Lithuanian salads are quite simple. Grated carrot salad with garlic and greens, grated beetroot salad, sauerkraut salad. Lithuanians also have their own variation of Olivier salad, which they called white salad or Lithuanian salad. One of the most iconic Lithuanian dishes is cepelinai. Repeat after me. Cepelinai. Also known as didžkukuliai. It's a potato dumpling filled with meat, eaten with sour cream and small bits of fried bacon, spirgučiai. Spirgučiai is a sauce used in many different dishes. Small pieces of bacon and lard heavily fried on a pan together with an onion until much of the fat melts away and you end up in small, somewhat crunchy pieces. Another dish which is also eaten with sour cream and spirgučiai is called vėdarai. Vėdarai are made by filling clean pig intestines with mashed potato and small pieces of meat and frying them. Lithuanians also make a variety of the blued sausage, which they call kraujiniai vėdarai. On a hot summer day, we love to eat cold soup called šaltibarščiai. It consists of boiled beets, cucumbers, radishes, green onion, hard-boiled egg, and dill mixed together in kefir. If you need a quick snack or starter, you can choose kastinys with black rye bread or boiled potatoes. Kastinys. Repeat after me. Kastinys. Not all places have this kind of snack, because kastinys is native to region Žemaitija. Kastinys is made from sour cream, sour milk, butter, garlic, salt and spices. It has a stiff consistency at room temperature, crumbly at lower temperatures, and melts quickly at high temperatures.
Motinėlė Justina covered many of the traditional foods Father Andrew and I got to try while we were there in Lithuania. I have to say, when it comes to cuisine, the Lithuanians are my kind of people. But one of my favorite foods we ate while we were there isn't originally Lithuanian at all. It was brought there by the Tatars and Karaites. I am speaking, of course, of kibinai or kibinlar. As our guide, Father Ginteras, pointed out, among all Jews, this dish is something only the Karaites eat because of their unique understanding of kosher laws.
So because Karaites don't accept the oral Torah, don't accept the Talmud, we have different understanding of halacha and the different understanding of kashrut, of kosher commandments. For example, one of the famous differences is that Jews don't eat and don't prepare milk and meat together because of a commandment that you shouldn't boil offspring in the milk of his mother. And Karaites read that and they don't see this commandment as obliging not to eat milk and meat together. That's why in one of the most famous Karaite meals, kibinlar in Karaite language, In kibbenlar you have both milk and meat. But of course, traditionally meat is either lamb or beef, because traditionally we didn't eat pork. Today the community is very small. In Lithuania there are only about 200 Karaites, so it's a very small community. And I don't think that we adhere strictly to kosher, but generally we had some laws which differed from Jewish ones. And in regards to kibben or kibbenlar in plural, dish became common to Lithuanian Tatars, Lithuanians themselves, and there is between Tatars and Karaites there is a debate where this originates. Tatars would say that, oh, this is our Turkic meal, and Karaites would say that it's their meal. Lithuanians usually say that it's a Karaite meal, and Lithuanians prepare it too, but of course they adopted it to Lithuanian customs. So usually when Karaites see Lithuanian kibbenlar, they would say that, oh, this is like a meat bun. This is not a real kibben.
Just an imitation.
Yeah, just an imitation. Because they use Karaites use sliced meat, not minced meat like Lithuanians, and they usually use just either lamb or beef. And Lithuanians often use pork, or even you can see kibbenai with cotton cheese and spinach, something like that. And Karaites say that this is abomination. This is like destruction of kibbenai.
So, what is kibbenai? As you probably guessed from what Father Gintre said, it's a kind of meat pasty. Whether or not the Karaites or Tatars came up with it first, the kibin or kibinas, as it is called in Lithuania, has become synonymous with the Karaite community and the city of Trakai. There were many other dishes, including a kind of traditional chicken soup, which the Karaites were known for. On Fridays, the days before the Jewish Sabbath, the streets of Trakai would fill with the smells of the Karaites' cooking. The Lithuanian Karaite poet and clergyman Simonas Firkovicius composed a song about the sensation of walking down this street on a Friday evening.
To fly to Trakai like a bird, my heart wishes it so, when my nose is tickled by the smells of Friday. On the island there is a castle, the fortress of Vytautas. The noodle tweaks its mustache, the smells of Friday. Son of Karaim, follow the tradition of your ancestors. Let the smells of Friday make you stronger.
Many of the civilizations of Central and Eastern Europe have a very similar dish to kibbenai. In fact, I grew up among many Chinese and Taiwanese relatives, and one of my favorite foods was, and remains, the jiaozi, a very similar concept, although the dough is of a very different consistency and is usually served in a sauce. All of this has led me to a single conclusion. The ultimate measure of a civilization, and the sum total of human art and culture, is its ability to put meat in bread. And of course, you've got to have some dessert and something to drink.
One of the most famous Lithuanian desserts is šakotis, tree cake. Šakotis. It has a distinctive shape and it is a popular dessert in Lithuanian celebrations, especially at weddings or other special occasions, such as Easter or Christmas. It is baked in a time and labor-intensive process by painting layers of batter and through a rotating spit in a special open oven or over an open fire. Another traditional dessert is so-called apple cheese, obuolių sūris. Obuolių sūris. It is not actually cheese. It is made out of boiled or cooked apples sweetened with sugar. Lithuanians call it cheese because its shape reminds the shape of a traditional Lithuanian compressed cotton cheese. Varškės sūris. Varškės sūris. Many Lithuanian fairy tales end with the phrase, And I was there, and I drank beer and mead, and it ran through my beard, because these are two traditional Lithuanian alcoholic drinks. Lithuanian mead, or medus, is a fermented alcoholic drink made from honey diluted in water and fermented with wine yeast. These are just some of our dishes and drinks. I hope you will have an opportunity to try some of them. Thank you for your attention.
During much of this episode, you've heard about the long, running conflict between the Lithuanians and the Teutonic and Livonian orders. With the union of Kriva, Jogaila united the Polish and Lithuanian crowns, and set the course for Lithuania to adopt Roman Catholicism as its official religion. He did so, at least partly hoping that conversion to Roman Catholicism would take Lithuania off the board as a target for the order's crusading activities. It did not. They denounced Jogaila's baptism and those of his subjects as phony, called his marriage to the Polish queen illegitimate, and to make a long story short, the newly baptized Jogaila and Vytautas once again found themselves at war with Roman Catholic Crusaders. The trigger this time was an uprising in Žemaitija, the western coastlands of Lithuania, which at the time had been ceded to the Teutonic Order. Poland and Lithuania took the Žemaitijan side, and rival powers in the region, including the Hungarians and Bohemians, also took sides. Vytautas was even offered the Lithuanian crown in return for betraying his cousin. But his resolve held firm, and Vytautas and Jogaila combined their forces, preparing for a joint march on the castle of Marienburg, the capital of the Teutonic Order, located in northern Poland, where Kęstutis had escaped in 1361. The Teutonic Order prepared to meet them near a place called the Green Wood, Grunwald, or in Lithuanian, Žalgiris. The Grand Master of the Teutonic Order began the battle by sending a pair of messengers to Vytautas and Jogaila with a gift of 2 swords, and a message intended to egg the cousins on to a battle.
Your Majesty, the Grand Master Ulrich sends you and your brother, through us, the deputies standing here, 2 swords for help, so that you, with him and his army, may delay less and may fight more boldly than you have shown, and also that you will not continue hiding and staying in the forest and groves, and will not postpone the battle. And if you believe that you have too little space to form your ranks, the Prussian Master Ulrich, to entice you to battle, will withdraw from the plain which he took for his army, as far as you want, or you may instead choose any field of battle so that you do not postpone the battle any longer.
To which Jogaila responded,
We accept the swords you send us, and in the name of Christ, before whom all stiff-necked pride must bow, we shall do battle.
As we shall see, the Grand Master's pride would soon come back to bite him, and the whole Battle of Grunwald would become a famous allegory for the victory of humility over pride. The Bohemian reformer Jan Hus wrote to King Jogaila in 1411 to congratulate him on his victory in the battle.
Where then are the 2 swords of the enemies? They were indeed cut down with those swords with which they tried to terrify the humble. Behold, they sent you 2 swords, the swords of violence and of pride, and have lost many thousands of them, having been utterly defeated.
The Grunwald swords, as they were called, became part of the Polish crown jewels, and important Polish and Lithuanian symbols of resistance against tyranny, and would later be used this way by anti-Nazi and anti-Soviet resistance fighters during the 20th century. Today, a monument to King Jogaila, King Władysław II Jagiello, as he is known to the Poles, stands in New York City's Central Park in the United States. King Jogaila has the 2 swords of Grunwald raised aloft, a symbol of defiance against the tyrants of the ages. Using tactics learned from his enemies, the Mongols, Vytautas used a feigned retreat to draw off part of the Teutonic Order's forces, while Jogaila and the Polish army engaged with Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen, who personally led 16 banners, a full third of the Crusader force, against the Polish right flank. Just as it seemed the Teutonic Knights might win the day, Vytautas returned to the battlefield, attacking von Jungingen from the rear. Surrounded, von Jungingen attempted to hack his way through the Lithuanian lines, but the Grand Master was pierced through the neck by a lance and instantly slain. The Battle of Grunwald was the beginning of the end of the Teutonic and Livonian orders. Although they'd have more conflicts with the Polish-Lithuanian Union in the years to come, their territory shrinks from this point onward. By 1454, the Teutonic Order had been ousted from Poland. Many tales have been told about the Battle of Grunwald. For Poles and Lithuanians, it is a moment of great national pride. For German nationalists of the 20th century, it was an example of how cowardly Slavs had betrayed and backstabbed the glorious Teutonic Order. But perhaps no retelling of the battle has been as important, or as artistically significant, as Jan Matejko's 1878 painting. This painting, simply called The Battle of Grunwald, is a masterpiece of mythopoeia, and shows how battles such as these are far more than mere historical events. They are powerful stories which shape the identities of those who live many centuries after they take place. The painting is huge, 10 feet high and nearly 17 feet long. It depicts all of the most important events of the battle compressed into a single, violent, glorious moment. At the center of the whole piece is the Grand Duke Vytautas. He is portrayed in this painting as a wild, liminal figure, his clothing and battle gear half belonging to the civilized West, from the perspective of Matejko, who was Polish, and the wild East of Europe. The small cross on the ducal crown of the neophyte duke contrasts strongly with the massive cross of the Teutonic banner behind his head, which is tilted and falling to the ground. Vytautas himself sits wildly in his saddle, holding his shield and sword aloft, his eyes blazing as though in a battle frenzy, reminiscent of his father, the last of Lithuania's great pagan warriors. To the Grand Duke's right, our left as we look at the painting, we see the Teutonic Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen. His horse is rearing, his sword an empty hand attempting to ward off one blow, even as a lance is leveled at his neck. Here, Matejko brings together chronicle and legend. A close look at the painting reveals that the lance with which the Grand Master is about to be slain is the lance of Saint Maurice. More specifically, it is the copy of that lance which the Emperor Otto II gave to Boleslav the Brave, the symbol of his mission to convert the Eastern Slavs. But the lance is not wielded by a Christian figure. It is wielded by a half-naked Lithuanian, or perhaps Samogitian pagan. Above it all, Stanislaus, the Polish and Roman Catholic saint, whose patronage included justice, moral order, and the chastisement of wicked rulers, watches with care, lending aid to the Polish and Lithuanian forces. The message of this painting could not be clearer. The Teutonic Order, by attacking and oppressing the pagan Prussians, Lithuanians, and Samogitians, rather than seeking their salvation, had failed in their Christian duty, to the point that now they found themselves in battle with baptized Christian rulers. For this, they had to answer not just to the people that they had oppressed, but to the saints and emperors whose mission they had betrayed.
The story of history including the story of Lithuania, includes many battles. As we study it and try to grapple with its currents, it can be easy to become cynical. After all, the good guys often lose, and the bad guys often win. And how do we even know who the good guys and bad guys are? History is, they say, written by the winners. Perhaps my good guys were actually the bad guys. Perhaps my chosen heroes of history were actually complex figures with motivations with which I cannot sympathize. Sometimes the stories of a nation's past are turned to the purposes of ideological nationalism, or sometimes ideology can turn religion into a weapon. This phenomenon is perhaps no more sharply illustrated than with the tales of the Northern Crusaders, who in the name of Christ thrust spears and swords into both pagans and Christians. They had lost the plot. Even the names by which we call things, names arising out of various times, places, and contexts, can stir up ideology and violence. These Orthodox Christian people in the southern and eastern parts of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, are they Rus, Ruthenians, Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians? How one answers that question in our time can be the source of anger and even hatred. But if there is anything that should be clear to us as Christians, it is this: history is complicated and should not be turned to ideological purposes. It should not be used to destroy, to crush the distinctiveness and personality of another person or another people. The Crusaders lost the plot. They started out as guardians for pilgrims, but transformed into an army with imperialistic impulses. As we try to make sense of the shifting borders of nation-states or even of ecclesiastical territories, we can also lose the plot. In the history of Lithuania, East and West synthesize, and we see Christians in their better moments take whatever is near them and use it for the real gospel, the gospel of Jesus Christ, the gospel of peace. We also see those who take the trappings of the gospel and turn it into alienation, even into death. But if we keep our eyes fixed on Christ and on the works of his saints, on whatever is good, pure, honest, and holy, then we are in that great story, the story of God himself. History, in the traditional sense, is the story of a people. And if we are Christian people, then how we read, tell, and understand history should always point to Christ.
I went to Lithuania because I wanted to understand this land on the edge of history, on the edge of East and West. But I also went because I wanted to see the hand of God working in that history and through the prayers of his mother. This was episode 2, and we've got a lot more stories to tell. The Wolf and the Cross, an Orthodox Christian pilgrimage in Lithuania, is a documentary created by Father Andrew Stephen Damick and Richard Rohlin, based on a pilgrimage made in August of 2022. This episode was written and narrated by Richard Rohlin, with direction and additional writing by Father Andrew Stephen Damick. Thank you to our voice actors Brandon and Leslie Talley and Dr. Cyril Jenkins. Our producer and editor is Father David Hyatt. The Lithuanian folk music for the series was provided by Unevijas, Lucija Vaicinavičiūtė, Solus Petrekis, and Raitilai, whose music you can find on Spotify and YouTube. Liturgical music was provided by the Amnos Choir, directed by Motinele Justina Trinkunaite Sungailine, as well as Protodeacon Viktoras Miniotas. Very special thanks goes to our pilgrimage guide and interpreter, as well as consultant on all things historical, linguistic, and Orthodox in Lithuania, Father Gintaras Jogaila. Thanks also goes to the Center for Orthodox Christian Initiatives in Vilnius, whose work you can find at ortodoksas.lt, and to the Russian Orthodox Diocese of Vilnius and Lithuania, whose website is orthodoxy.lt. If you want to support this kind of Orthodox Christian storytelling, share this podcast with your friends and go to ancientfaith.com/support and make a donation. This has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.